Hi everyone, thank you for coming to the Schaumburg Library tonight. We are having a wonderful presentation on aging and brain health given by Susan Frick from Rush. We're so excited to have her here today. I just wanted to let you know if you're here in person, the restrooms are just right out here to your left. If you need it during the presentation, feel free. If you are watching at home and you have a question that you want to ask the presenter, feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat. And also, if you're at home, please fill out the poll as to how many people are watching so we can record for our statistics. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Susan and let her get started. Thank you so much for supporting the library.
Thank you. And I've got this one.
Yes. Oh, you got it. No, you're good. Sorry.
That'd be my third microphone.
Yeah, I know, right?
Hi. Hopefully the sound is okay for everyone. My name's Susan Frick, and thank you for having me here. And I am part of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center in Chicago. And we are one of, I think it's around 32 federally funded Alzheimer's centers. And we, I think, are the largest. We have around 200 staff people. And a lot of it is because of the research that I'm going to talk about this evening. And so we are involved in clinical trials for people who have already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or are at great risk of maybe having troubles. We have also very large observational studies, which I'm going to talk about, that have been starting to help us learn about what is healthy aging and what can we do to maybe reduce our risk of showing the signs of dementia as we get older. And so one of those studies, and let me see if I can get this to work, is really helping, well, a couple of them are really helping us to think about what can we do to help reduce our risk of showing the signs of dementia. And my guess is, if you've ventured out here on what turned out to be a lovely day, it was pouring as I was driving here from Chicago, but you have probably some connection to dementia and some reason, or just are wanting to know. I've worked in this field. It's getting to be almost 40 years, which is kind of amazing. I've worked at Rush 29 years, and both my parents had dementia, both my grandmothers, an uncle, and a cousin. So when I think about, what can we do to reduce risk and what I'm learning about that, I think a lot about it for myself too, and try to incorporate a lot of what we've been learning. And I think recently we hear a lot in the news, don't we, about, oh, do this and you won't get Alzheimer's. Or I get asked, I don't know how many people, if this would be a question down the road, but I get asked constantly about Prevagen. Should I take Prevagen? Because I think Prevagen has like the best marketing campaign ever. So there's a lot, and we'll talk about it, but there's a lot out there about, because they know we're all scared about dementia and about living with it. And so they, I think they play on that a lot and kind of, encourage us to do certain things. And with the thought of you won't get dementia, we're not quite to that point in the research. And so we'll kind of go through where we're at with that. And so let me just, I always point it at the slide and I need to point it at the computer. So how are we learning? I want to kind of give first how we're learning this information, like what we're going to talk about this evening. How have we learned this? And it's because we have very large research studies, the largest in the world, looking at why do some people develop neurological problems and some don't. For about 32 years now, we've had the religious orders study, which first started as the nun study that you maybe have heard about. Then it melded over to us, and it's not just nuns, it's nuns, priests, and brothers. We have about 1,700, I think it is, nuns, priests, and brothers who have either been in the study or are currently in it. It's been going 31, 32 years, and it's across the country. And so we go around all over and have different groups, convents, orders that we've worked with. And that was our first study. We went to them because they tend to be generous people. And so 31, 32 years ago, asking someone to donate their brain was a little, it'd take you back a little bit, thinking about that. And so that's why they went to that group first. And because they're all grouped together, so we know where they are. And so they agreed, and we're a good many. The first site for our religious order study was in LaGrange Park. It was the Sisters of St. Joseph's. They were our first site, and they take great pride in that. And then it's moved all around. Dr. Bennett, who's the head of our center, he said that pretty quickly into doing that study, he realized that it's a wonderful study, and it's been the base of everything else we've done observation-wise. But he said there were some drawbacks to meeting with people who were clergy and priests and brothers and nuns, because they had all lived together, they had all eaten the same foods, they had all had similar education, had similar, it was like, he goes, it was kind of like testing family, because they had all been together for so long. So he started the next study, which is the one that probably we're talking about the most, called the Memory and Aging Project Study, or MAP. And it's actually, the reason I even got connected here to give this talk is because we are, one of our sites for MAP is Encore Village. And so that's what got us connected. We have over 2,600 people who have either been in the study or are currently in the study. And part of my job is to help recruit and retain people within the study. So I've been meeting constantly. I signed up 6 people yesterday at Covenant Village up in Northbrook. And so we, just constantly out talking to more and more people. What it means to be in the study and how we've gathered the information we're going to talk about is it's for anyone over the age of 65. People agree to about 5 hours of testing a year where we come and meet with them. We don't expect them to come to us because getting to Rush is not easy, especially for someone who's older. And so we picked continuing care communities, even though we have people who live in their own homes too. And then they agree to about 5 hours worth of testing. They then agree to organ donation when they pass away, which is a huge thing. So they donate their brain, their spinal cord, the fluid around the brain, and then some muscle and nerve tissue from both the arm and the leg, which is an amazing gift. And that gives us the ability to see how they look while they're living, how they present. We do memory tests with them every year, and then ask about a lot of other things too, which we're going to talk about. And then we get to see their brain after they've passed away. And so what we've learned, which this is what I find, considering my family history, what I find very interesting, is we've learned that there's a lot of people who never show the signs of dementia while they're living. When we test them, they seem fine. They don't show any confusion. But when we look at their brain, they have the pathology of Alzheimer's in their brain, which isn't that interesting. And so then the question becomes, why does this group of people have the pathology of Alzheimer's, but they don't show it while they're living? And those are the lifestyle things we're going to talk about in just a second. So we never realized until this study really started going for a while that that lifestyle could have an impact on brain health. And so that's why you hear a lot of things about this now. Now, it's not a 100% guarantee. We're going to go through these things, and I wish I could say do all these things and you're good. You won't get dementia. But that's not the case. And that there's, as we go through this, you might think about people in your own lives and you're like, they did a lot of these things and they still had dementia. So it's not a guarantee by any means. The study is funded by the NIH and the NIA, which you might be thinking, how's that going? Because this year has been a little rough with funding. So far, we've been doing okay. And so our funding has stayed pretty good. And Dr. Bennett has been putting in contingency plans because this is a multi-million-dollar study. And so then our participants agree to about 5 hours of testing. They go through a ton of questionnaires. They go through the same memory test year after year, to the point where they kind of joke that there's a story that we give them that you can actually nowadays look up online. And one time I was at with the nuns at the Sisters of St. Joseph's, and they were saying, oh, one of our sisters passed away, and she was the woman who would prep us on the Anna Thompson story, which is this memory test. And I'm like, you're not supposed to be prepping as a group. And I mentioned it to Dr. Benny. He goes, that's okay. He's like, they have to remember it when they go in and test. And if they have any memory problems, it would show. They go through a little sleep study with us where we give them a gadget to wear. We don't stay in their place overnight. They wear that overnight, and because we're learning about sleep having connection to brain health. We watch, they wear something for 10 days that collects how physically active they are. It's like an Apple Watch, but it's slightly different. And we hook it on and they wear it. They do an MRI every 2 years. So we will send a car to Encore, pick up a few people and take them to Rush, do the MRI. The retinal scan I think might be on hold right now, but the retinal scan could look in through the eye and see into the brain a bit, and you could see plaques and tangles, or the plaques a bit. And then we do a blood draw with everyone, and then the organ donation. And here, I know this is small, but we're going to focus in on each one, so don't worry. We're learning that there seems to be quite a few style choices that seem to reduce your risk of showing signs of dementia. So as we go through these, think about yourself, think about those people in your lives, think about kids in our lives too, of how we can encourage good healthy habits. And again, it's not that this is going to completely reduce your risk, but it does a good bit. I've heard up to around 40% they think it could reduce the risk of dementia for people. So what are they? And we'll go into them in more specifics. And the first two, I kind of lump them in what to me seems like more obvious order for brain health to the ones that I like the least. I do it on my own level, so you'll see which one I think is harder for me to do. The first, cognitive activity. Doesn't it make sense that if you do things to keep your brain active, you'll probably be helping it along and reduce your risk of showing signs of dementia as you get older. And so there's many different ways you can, have cognitive activities. There can be, and it can be anything that you find interesting. When I give this talk a lot, and actually just gave it last week up in Northbrook at Covenant Village, at a place like that, they have so many activities, so many things people can do, that they're always listing them off for me of things that they can do. But for us who aren't living in a communal setting, to think about what is it we can do that keeps ourselves engaged. And so, we're finding that people who stay curious about life, stay interested, stay engaged, people who aren't just zoning out, I love to turn on the TV when I get home, but not just watching TV and not doing anything to maybe discuss or process, if that is the thing that you're watching. Reading, being in a book club, playing games, playing card games, playing any type of dice or any of those types of games. We are finding, we do a social history with all of our participants, and we are finding that people who, and this isn't anything that will help us now, but I think to keep in mind for if you have grandkids, great-grandkids, or whoever in your life, or just kids around you, we're finding that people who learn a language or play an instrument at a younger age, that seems to have protective ability or protective factor that'll continue as you age, which is interesting. One time I was giving a talk, one of our research sites is the Moorings in Arlington Heights. And I was meeting with the residents there to kind of talk about what we've been learning from the study. And there was a group of women sitting towards the front as we were gathering before it got going. And they were all Caucasian. I only say this because they all were speaking Spanish. So it was kind of noticeable. And I walked up to them and I went, I gotta ask, what's going on? And they said, we have a Spanish language class here. We're all taking Spanish, and so whenever we're together, we practice. And I thought, what a great thing for just staying interested, staying engaged. So for yourself to think about. One time I was giving a talk at one place, and a woman said that she refused to use, I know this isn't the right term, but used like speed dial, like programmed phone numbers on her phone, that she insisted on typing in the phone number. You know, and there was a day, dating myself, there was a time when we had to memorize phone numbers to be able to make phone calls. And she said, I'm not giving that skill up. I'm going to keep remembering phone numbers. And I was up there at the front thinking, if I lost my phone, I couldn't call a single person in my family because I don't know any of their phone numbers. So, you know, think about what are things you can do to keep yourself going, to keep your brain interested and engaged in other things. The fact you came out to a talk on an evening, you're doing that. You know, and for those of you at home too, you're doing that because you're staying engaged and curious. The next, this one I think also makes sense for brain health because it's something that gets the blood moving and gets oxygen moving throughout your body and into the brain. We're finding that people who stay physically active do better with their brain than those who don't. And so those people, again, who maybe never showed the signs of Alzheimer's but actually had it in their brain, they were engaging in physical activity in these other things too. So we're finding that it doesn't have to be, you know, it can be a strenuous activity. It can be something that you work up a good sweat and you go and work out. I did a row machine this morning, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be just getting extra steps in a day. And so thinking about, you know, one gentleman I work with, one of our, who runs several of our studies, Dr. Raj Shah, I've heard him speak a lot, and he always talks about when you, like here, when you come to a parking lot, don't like circle to find that great parking spot that's close to the door. Find one that's a little farther out in the parking lot and then get some extra steps. Or when you come into a place, do a few laps around something just to get in some extra steps. Because we're finding that the more people move, knowing that as some people age, or even you know, before, there can be mobility problems. There can be there can be reasons people don't move quite as easily. And so knowing that, it's still moving to what your ability is. And again, that makes a lot of sense in that it's causing the brain to work and to be fed by oxygen and blood moving through the brain. And so the way we find that is, again, because we have them wear that little gadget and they wear it for the 10 days. It's funny, there's several, the church that I go to, there's several people who signed up for the study. And I saw them at church about a month ago and they were all showing me their bands. They're like, we're wearing them right now. So they were collecting that information on them. We are, and I have it just lumped in here just because of where I could remember to talk about it. We are finding that people, something that can increase your risk is if you're having what looks like Parkinson's signs, whether it could be actual Parkinson's or Parkinsonism, where you're just showing some of those mobility problems. So people who get a little bit more shuffling gait, you know, where they're not picking their feet up quite the same, or people who have just the difficulty getting moving. That can be a risk factor to show that there's problems with dementia. Another one is unexplained weight loss. So unexplained, where you just don't know, like, you know, why are they losing weight? What's going on? Some people intentionally lose weight, but some people as they get older lose weight and you're not sure why. That can actually be an increase in risk of showing signs of dementia. My dad, who probably had more of a vascular dementia, he was always very good about his weight all his life. But then as he got older and more limited in his mobility, he put on some weight and had a bit of a stomach going there. And then he started losing the weight later on. And my brother goes, oh, thank goodness, the weight's coming off. And I go, yeah, that might not be good. And he was having more trouble with dementia at that point. It was becoming more of a problem. Unexplained weight loss can be an issue. So do those two make sense so far? To me, out of this list we're going through, these two, at least to me, made the most sense of brain health. The others, as we're going through them, maybe not quite so much. And one, this kind of goes along with movement. We're finding that people who get what we refer to as getting out of their home space, so whether it's their apartment, their house, if they're in a place in a continuing care community, that space, people who tend to stay in their home space more frequently seem to be at greater risk of having trouble with memory problems. I go in and out of continuing care communities all the time with my job. And plus then my parents lived in one. And I often do training with staff in continuing care communities, and they talk about how there's people who like move in and then they don't come out a lot. They stay in their house, or they stay in their own homes too and don't come out a lot. There can be a lot of reasons why someone does that, and we'll talk about some of them, but it does seem to be like an increased risk of dementia to do that, to be just kind of staying back. It could be that some of it is the mobility, that they have trouble with mobility and getting out. It could be that some of it is mood. And we're going to talk about mood in just a little bit, because we're seeing that mood has a link to memory too. And like I talked about, people who tend to be a little bit more couch potato, watching TV maybe a little too much, or just sitting, they are at increased risk of showing signs of dementia. So people who tend to have a bit more sedentary lifestyle. So the more, as you know, again, the fact you all came out here, you're probably not having any issues with that. But think about the people in your life. If there's anyone who just is tending to pull in more, if there's things you can do to get them out and about, that can be good. As my mom was more classic Alzheimer's disease, had it for probably, it could have been 15 years maybe. She passed 11 years ago. She was a very social person. She really liked being in groups. She was out and about. But as she started to show the signs of dementia, she really became a homebody. And I think it was because it was getting harder and harder for her to remember people's names, to feel like she wasn't making a mistake in public, and that became very stressful for her. And when I helped, a bunch of us were cleaning out their condo when, like, she went to memory care and my dad needed more assistance, we found the classic thing of so many notes in her place, trying to keep things together, like making lists, like writing, need to call Susan, like she needed to call me, writing down different things, writing the names of her neighbors. I think that all became so difficult for her that she was trying to keep it together. And I think that's why she didn't get out as much. So the moving around your community can be really important. We probably always thought of moving around the, sorry for coughing into the mic for those at home. We thought about moving around the community as good for your mood, but we probably didn't think about it as good for your brain. And that's one thing I think we started to learn. And we watched and asked people who are in our study what they do and how often they get out, and we have them go through many surveys that look at depression and look at mood, and we're starting to see a pattern in some of those. So, next one that fits with mood, socializing. We're finding that people who can stay connected to others as they get older do much better with brain health than people who don't. Now, as people get older, and it's hard to maintain friendships sometimes, because friendships change, work changes, family changes, and so, and they maybe move into a different space. And so figuring out how to stay connected and engaged, we definitely saw this as being good for mood, but we didn't realize mood had a strong impact on brain health too, and it does seem to. So people who struggle more with depression seem to be at greater risk. People, we call it resiliency, people who can, we all have things that happen during our lives, right? We all have ups and downs and times when things are more difficult. We're finding that people who have trouble coming through those events, realizing that there's going to be sometimes when you've had a really hard life event, there's going to be depression and there's going to be sadness and it's going to take a while. But people who get stuck in that mood seem to do worse with memory than people who what we call resiliency, people who are able to get through those things and be able to move on. People who tend to be, you know, the phrase, people who see the glass as half full or half empty. We're seeing that people who tend to see the glass as half full, that seems to be protective, and people have less likely to show the signs of dementia, where people who see the glass as half empty are at greater risk. And again, it's not 100%. And I think what's hard with some of these that we're going to talk about as we go through, there'll probably be at least one or maybe more that you go, oh, great, I have that. You know, we all have something. We all have some risk factor. You know, and these are hard to work on. Personality things are hard to change. But I think to realize, like, personality can have an impact on your health and on your brain health, which is interesting to think about. And so we're finding that, you know, the more you can stay connected, whatever it is, the more you can stay engaged with people. We're finding that a risk factor is loneliness, that people who report being lonely, and we sure all have been talking about loneliness more through COVID, because COVID was a lonely time for a lot of people. And so we've talked about it as kind of a, you know, I think they were listed it as an epidemic across the United States, that there's a lot of people who are lonely. And the thing with loneliness is it's a self-perceived emotion. So you can be in a crowd of people and still feel lonely, like feel like you're not connected. Or you could be around just a couple people and feel, or by yourself, and feel totally okay. You know, it's just however you tend to be wired. You know, I'm sure we've all had times where we've been in a group of people, but we feel like we maybe don't fit. You know, like we don't fit in. For me, I think of high school. I think of, you know, there's times when you think, you know, I'm around others, but I still feel a little lonely. We're finding that people who kind of get stuck in that feeling of loneliness are at greater risk of showing signs of dementia. And so that can be a problem too. People who tend to be narcissistic, so people who tend to think about themselves more, and I think this might, yes, fit with here. Purpose. This kind of fits with the social, but slight different bend. We're finding that people who have a sense of purpose as they get older seem to do better with their memory than people who don't. Now, maintaining a sense of purpose can be tricky as you get older. It can be hard when, you know, families change, you lose family members, or, you know, your job stops, and, you know, if that was your main social circle, you know, how can that be? Oh, I was doing training at a place, and we were talking about loneliness, and one gentleman there, who's, you know, he's working, so he's not retirement age yet. He said, my friends are my coworkers. He goes, I don't need more friends than that. And I said, yeah, that's great, but who are going to be your friends when you stop working? And he kind of went, oh, I do. He goes, I do need to think about that, you know, because that is hard when that's your whole group. And so we're finding that people who can have a sense of purpose, and purpose can be different for every single person. Purpose can be, you know, being a caregiver to someone, being in relationship with someone, being connected to people, being part of a group, being part of a church or a faith community, being in a book group. Can be anything. You know, whatever it is, going out every day, taking your pets out for a walk, whatever it is, can be a sense of purpose. And people who can figure out their purpose as their life changes seem to do better with memory than people who don't. And so I kind of jumped onto some of the risk factors already, but people who tend to be depressed are at greater risk, and that narcissistic. People who are narcissistic they don't really have a sense of purpose, I was going to say, except maybe their purpose is just to take care of themselves, but they don't really think about other people. They're mainly thinking about themselves. And we're finding that they're at greater risk of showing signs of dementia So, until we started doing this study, and been doing it for a while now, we didn't realize that mood had such an impact on brain health. And that's very interesting, to kind of realize we all should be thinking about our mood just for our own health, but also for the brain. So do those all make sense so far? Any thoughts? Did anything jump out at you? Any questions or comments? Do they all kind of make sense? Yeah, okay. We're going to head on. Oh, we're getting into my category of least favorite because they're the ones I have the most trouble with. Sleep. We have people in our study do a little sleep study. And like I said, they wear this gadget that goes around their wrist and then onto their finger, and they wear it for one night. And we gather how their sleep is going. And we're finding, and along with other places, finding that interrupted sleep, not just occasionally, because we all, unless you're really blessed, all of us as we get older have trouble with sleep. A lot of us, at least. I sure do. I'm in a phase right now where I read about 2 hours every night, and it's bad because sometimes I'm like, it's a good book, and so when I wake at 2, I'm like, oh good, get to read, and I'm like, that's not the attitude I should have. Should be trying to get back to sleep. So we're finding that interrupted sleep for an extended period of time seems to have trouble. I think there's a couple different things that can happen with people's sleep. Some can be people who really struggle to fall asleep. I don't know if anyone has that issue, but just really struggle. Then there's some, and I fall into this one. I can fall asleep super fast, really fast. I can't always stay asleep. And so I'll wake up at 2 or 3, and then I'm awake for a while before I fall back to sleep. Does anyone have any trouble with any of those? Yeah. You're that way too? Yeah, I think women in particular, but also men too, we can have trouble with sleep. And so what we're finding is that if you can fall back to sleep, we're all going to wake up, and especially as we get older, because we're all making trips to the bathroom, we're going to have trouble with sleep. But if we can fall back to sleep, it's good. What we're seeing is that the more deep sleep you can get a night, that, and not just the REM sleep, REM's great, but deep sleep is where they think, and this is going to be a really simplistic description, but they think that within deep sleep, there's actually a cleansing that kind of occurs in the brain when you're in deep sleep and can help kind of clear out the plaques that are in the brain. We didn't talk about this, but the classic signs of Alzheimer's that you see in the brain are plaques and tangles. You maybe have heard that before. Plaques are deposits around the brain, and then tangles are kind of the neurons being tangled up that they have trouble communicating with each other. And then there's camps of researchers who say, is it the plaques that are the most problem, or is it the tangles that are the most problem? And they go back and forth on that. The deep sleep seems to help reduce the amount of plaque that could occur in the brain. And so the more deep sleep we can get, the better. I wear my Apple Watch at night, which I'm not sure is great, because then every morning I wake up and I'm like, so how was my sleep? Which I think then you fixate on it way more. I never seem to get the amount of deep sleep that we're supposed to get. From what we read, because when I was giving the talk up at Covenant, one of my coworkers was there, and the crowd was asking how much deep sleep we should get, and so she was Googling it as we were doing the talk, and it's about 20% of your sleep, which there's no way I'm getting that. I'm getting around a half hour if I'm good. So it's hard to increase the deep sleep, except just you tend to get the deep sleep right off the bat when you go to bed. And so sleep becomes a concern for all of us. And so if sleep is something that's an issue for you, there's a lot of tips out there to try. Is there anything anyone's done that they try to help with their sleep? They give tips like, I actually went to a sleep therapist at Rush, who was wonderful. And he gave a lot of tips on things to do to help with sleep. Thinking about your caffeine intake, reducing that when possible. Not taking naps during the day, which that was a tricky one for me. Thinking about when I would go to bed and then I would wake up, and he actually had me go to bed later, which I was surprised because I was like, I'm already not getting enough sleep. And he goes, no, if you go to bed later, it'll condense it and it'll train your body to get used to that. So I went to bed later for a while. Getting some sun right when you wake up, or short within, I think they say half hour to an hour of when you wake up, being by some windows and getting some sunlight helps to get your body back into a rhythm. Alcohol can be, good for falling asleep, not always good for staying asleep. And so sometimes, it was funny, I don't have a glass of wine very often, but I was telling him I'll have a glass of wine sometimes in the evening. And I thought he'd say, oh, you need to stop that. And what he said to me was, can you chug it by 7 o'clock? I was like, wow, that was not what I thought you were going to say. And he said, because you want to be digesting it a good bit before you go to bed, because then it might not have that impact of waking you up in the middle of the night. There's things to try if this is of issue to you. Reducing use of phone or iPad or things, not reaching for it in the middle of the night. The bright light can be a problem. We don't have a TV in our bedroom, but I know some people love having a TV in their bedroom. So, figuring out what works for you with sleep. But sleep can be an issue. And especially if you have sleep issues that go for a long period of time, but to know that we all have bad nights occasionally, and then it can get better with that. So, sleep. And the last one, this is the one that's the hard one for me, is healthy eating. We're finding that there seems to be, and I can see you're right in the light, aren't you? There seems to be a food that has good brain benefit. It's not that and so we have created actually a diet that has come from our study that has shown great, has done really well, and has shown that even if you adhere to it moderately, it seems to reduce your risk of showing signs of dementia, which is wonderful. So people who because diets are hard, they're not easy to stick to. And so, thank you. But we're finding that even if you adhere to it about 30%, she said big thumbs up for that. It can reduce your risk of showing signs of dementia. This diet has done so well that it received its own grant funding and was tested in a much larger setting, thank you, than just our study, which was still with thousands of people. So, as we go through this, think about your own diet. Think about if there's things you can add in, just, because we're seeing this as being really good. Again, this is not a diet to lose weight, but I think some people could lose weight on this diet. Sorry. So it's called the MIND diet. Had anyone heard of it? It's made a lot of press. If you Google MIND, like brain, it's M-I-N-D. There's a lot out there. There's been books written on it. It's talked about a lot. And so there's things within the MIND diet that you should try to incorporate into your diet. There's things you should try to reduce or even eliminate if possible. Now again, I know with a diet, we're all going to goof it up at some point. And so don't, again, if you just can do this a little bit, it has benefits. So don't beat yourself up. Or if you see things on this list that you're like, that is food I love, and it's going to be hard to give it up. That's okay. Figure out what works the best for you. And so the first is that we're seeing is omega-3 fatty acids. Do you know where you get omega-3s? Fish, yeah, from fish. We're finding that people who eat one good fish meal a week, just one a week, seems to have benefit. Now, not all fish is equal, right? Salmon, I could hear you starting to say it. Yeah, salmon has the best. Not the McDonald's filet of fish, unfortunately. Does not, even though I do like that one. Salmon, walleye, sardines, if you can eat them. Tuna has some, not a lot, of omega-3s. Like tilapia, which I think tilapia has kind of gone through not used quite as much as it used to be. Tilapia has very, very little omega-3s, so is not seen as, it's a decent protein, but not seen as good for brain health. When I first started talking in continuing care communities about this diet, they were rarely served salmon, and a few other things. And I always felt like I had just caused like a riot within the continuing care community because they were heading off to storm the dietitian to be like, serve it more. Now they have salmon all the time. It's not a problem. So, but if you can have it just once a week, if you're someone, I don't eat meat, and for a long time I didn't eat fish, but then from hearing on our studies, I try to eat salmon occasionally, but I'm not getting it weekly. So I try to then take, like, chia seeds have omega-3s, or flaxseed has that also. We are finding that, and some of you might be taking like fish oil tablets, which don't change anything from this talk. We're finding that, that's great, but it's best if you can get it in the food source. But supplements have a place too. But we're finding people seem to do better that have it in the food source. So the next one, and I have the answer up there, but antioxidants, which is berries, right? Also dark leafy vegetables, but berries have a lot of antioxidants. So we're finding that our diet recommends having blueberries, a half cup of blueberries, like several times a week. Like I think it says 5 within our diet. So if you can, throw blueberries into yogurt or into a smoothie or cereal or oatmeal or whatever, ice cream, whatever you can throw or by themselves, whatever you can put blueberries on, and other berries too are good too, but blueberries seem to have the most. That gets you the antioxidants. And so, I had yogurt and blueberries and some chia seeds when I sat out in the car in the parking lot. So, if you can get that regularly, that seems to have benefit. Olive oil. We're finding that if you can use a bit of olive oil on pretty much a daily basis, that seems to have benefit. And I talked to a lot of seniors who are like, how am I going to get olive oil? Or I'm thinking, how am I not going to have too much olive oil? I think if you can pick a salad dressing that has olive oil in it, or use it for cooking sometimes, that has great benefit. So also whole grains. We're finding that people who eat whole grains on a regular basis do better. Lean proteins. We're finding that if you can, and you'll see on the things to avoid, red meat. We are finding that if you can lean towards the chicken, the fish, I do tofu. I know not everybody is a big tofu fan, but if you can do those, that seems to be better than eating the red meat. I know if you're someone who's like, I really like red meat, I think in any of these things, if you can have a meal where you would have had it, but you do something else, that's a win. So we're seeing, and red meat has been kind of knocked for cancer risk too. It's just a higher fat food. So, the more you can avoid it, the better. Leafy greens, the more you can add in some just good leafy greens on a regular basis, that's good. Nuts have vitamin E in them, which we're finding is vitamin E as being good for the brain. And they tend to be in almonds more than other nuts. Almonds, walnuts, not as much in like cashews. Peanuts, I think, have it a bit. I don't know on the other nuts. People have asked me on pistachios and things like that. I'm not as sure. But almonds is the one I hear about the most. So, if you can add those into your diet every once in a while. Beans, if you're someone who can throw in some beans in a salad or in anything else, has some, is a good protein too. Now, here's one that's on our list still, wine. Except I've heard Dr. Bennett say all alcohol, so I don't know. I had always heard it was red wine. Now, we are still seeing that in our diet as being good for brain health, but recently, alcohol has been kind of said as being slightly elevating your cancer risk. So it's been received, kind of mixed, benefits. But we still list it in our diet as being good. So those are all the things we see as being good for you. Is there anything else you've heard of? Because I know people talk about things all the time. Is there anything you've heard as being good brain health food?
Is krill oil?
Which kind of oil?
Krill.
Krill.
R-I-L-L.
I have not heard that as being good for brain. It's not in our diet, at least. I've only heard the olive oil.
How about I use olive oil or avocado oil?
Avocado is a good fat and is actually seen as being good. I don't know if it's better than olive oil.
Compare it, it's okay.
As far as I know, it is. Yeah, it's because avocado is also a decent fat to eat. So in moderation. Yeah. Anything else people have heard? It's being good for you. One that comes up that's not in our diet, but I've heard it in others, is dark chocolate. Is anyone a dark chocolate? I love dark chocolate. Where there is some thought that just a small amount of dark chocolate can have some benefit. It's not in our diet, but I have heard it in others. So these are the things to try to increase in your diet. Here's the things to try to avoid. And these are the ones that I think make the diet then hard. Is because, again, I think we all have things we gravitate towards that we like, and maybe gravitate towards when we're stressed or nervous. And so we have our foods that are hard to give up. Processed foods tend to be, the more you can limit those, they tend to taste really good. And for some people, I'm always very careful when I'm talking to different groups, because for some people, eating healthy is also expensive, and they might not have access to food that I have access to, or that, wherever you live. So I think it's hard to it's not always easy to get to the good food. High amounts of sugar can be hard. That's the one that is hard for me. I can give up the salt and the deep fried things, but the sugary things are hard for me. So that one's tough. Red meat we already talked on, the more you can give it up. Cheese. I know, sorry. Except I have heard that the new person who's running our studies on the Mind Diet has been saying that low-fat cheese on not all the time, but occasionally is okay. So I got to get some more information on that. Before, we had been saying you should only have about an ounce a week of cheese.
Wow.
Yeah, which I think is almost impossible. I think about, at least I don't know for you guys, but I've really limited cheese in my diet, but it's really hard to give it up entirely. But again, to me, what I think on is, are there meals where I would have put cheese on it and I don't? And could that be seen as successful? So, but now I'm, maybe with a low fat, cheese can be a little bit more in the diet than I'd thought. So to kind of look at that. Risk factors, signs of dementia, and I just put here because they sometimes relate to food, is, and so as we go through these, a lot of us might have some of these, but it's more if they're left untreated can be the problem. And so diabetes, left untreated, can be a risk for dementia. Cerebral vascular disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all of those things untreated can be put you at greater risk for showing signs of dementia. So, if you are someone who lives with any of those, just to think about how important it is to keep those kind of in check for your physical health, but also then for the brain health, to kind of watch for that. So it sounds like a lot of you hadn't heard of the MIND diet before, so does it, this I think then can be kind of interesting information to think about. Okay, how can I work? I try to think about this, especially with my family history. I try to think about this in what I eat on a regular basis. And so I make, a smoothie frequently that gets in a lot of the things. I throw in everything that we know of being good for brain health. Put in the leafy vegetables, I put in spinach, I put in lean protein, I put in berries, and I put in the chia seeds. So I'm getting quite a few things in one drink. So if there's ways you can add things in, that's one way to try to increase your diet on that. And so I think that might, and then genetics, and then we'll get to questions. We're finding that in most cases, there's a mix of genetics, that it's not one single thing. In some families, there are some cases of young onset Alzheimer's disease where you can see that it runs through the family line, and multiple generations have had someone young with Alzheimer's. That's often a single gene. But for most people, it's a genetic mix of things that makes them increase risk of dementia. But we're finding that lifestyle can help offset it at times. And so, it's you don't want to think, I'm definitely going to get it, so what's the point of working on my lifestyle? It can help to kind of to balance in some cases those things. We are finding that, so I mentioned those people who never show the signs but have Alzheimer's in their brain. We are finding that if people have multiple things going on in their brain, like they have Alzheimer's, they have Lewy body dementia, there's an element called, I think it's TDP43, which you wouldn't have heard of, we just see it in the brains. If they have multiple things, like strokes are very common. If they have those multiple things, then it is hard to offset with lifestyle, that they probably, with the multiple things in their brain, they will be showing the signs of dementia. But they can still reduce it a bit with that. So, we're kind of finding that a mixed pathology in the brain is more common even than just solely Alzheimer's disease, that it's Alzheimer's and other things, if that makes sense. So we are finding that genetics can be a risk factor, but not as high as we originally thought with this. So does anyone have, and I think we're to the end then, does anyone have any questions on things about Alzheimer's or things from this that they've had? And I don't know if there's any at home too. Yeah, go ahead. Plaques and tangles?
Yeah, when do they show up, or is there anything that will maybe speed them up, or?
So there is thought that, and that's a really good question, there is thought that those are developing maybe even decades before people are showing the signs of dementia, so that they're starting. There's new medications out that are the first ones that, and I'm always terrible, Leqembi is one, I think. I'm always terrible at saying the name of the drug. It's only been out about a year, maybe two. It's an infusion. There is thought that that is the first drug that is supposed to be disease altering, that can go in and kind of break up some of those plaques, but it's not. It's a high risk medication. You have to be screened for brain bleeds. You have to, it's an infusion, you have to go in every few weeks to have it done, so it's not great. And, people are trying it, and it kind of gets them an extra year or so in the early stage, maybe. So they can be starting, so we've had some clinical trials that are looking at people who are at risk for dementia because of either family history or things, and seeing if giving them certain drugs would help break up some of those plaques before they're showing the signs. We're not, it's still in very much the testing phase with that. So it can be, decades. So people with just showing what we would call as Alzheimer's, it's a very slow, and I don't know if any of you have had someone in your family, but it's a very slow progressing thing. It's not that someone just You know, if we had someone come in the clinic and say, my family member was fine until last Tuesday and then something occurred, that's not Alzheimer's disease. That probably is stroke or something else. But Alzheimer's is, oh, look at that, very slow progressing. So they're probably even showing signs long before anybody notices. They're starting to have some problems, and it just slowly progresses. Anyone who's had someone with Alzheimer's in their family, the classic, and I said it with my mom, even though I've worked in this field this long, was like, oh, now that I know she has this, I think she's been showing signs for years before we picked up on it. And we just sort of wrote it off as other things. So, yeah, so they think it starts quite a bit.
So along those lines,
yeah.
What is the best thing that we can do to notice those things in ourselves?
I know.
Forgetting people's names is
I know.
a normal thing? I mean, that's the whole...
It's, yeah, so I think I sure think about it. So the main things we can do are a lot of these lifestyles, staying as positive as possible, staying as engaged, staying as involved. There's a lot of brain games out there, and and with a high price tag, they're okay to do, but we're not finding any great benefit from them. I think it's hard because I think a lot of us do worry, and so then when we make a mistake, we're all like, oh my gosh, I must be starting to have some problems. Know that everybody has memory slows as they get older. Your question on noticing it in yourself, it's hard because sometimes people with dementia, some people do notice they're having problems, some people don't. And so sometimes they're not going to notice that there's something going on or occurring for them. It's the people around them that notice. So it's hard, But I think just to realize, like, I don't know if my mic just went off, to realize, am I causing that? That we all make mistakes. People with dementia are making mistakes that become so apparent that it's like they're really struggling. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, except that it's just really hard, because we always referred to them for a while I worked in our memory clinic, which is part of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, and we referred to people as the worried well, because there's a lot of us who worry about having it and come in and be tested and we're like, you're fine, that we all have trouble with it.
Is there such a thing as self-assessment, like a test that you can take?
There's probably something you can look stuff up online, but if you're really worried, I would talk with your general practitioner and say, I'm concerned. There is a little test that a general or any doctor can do in the office. And then what's important is to know a baseline, like to kind of be able to say, because some of us are good in certain areas of memory and some are not good. I'm terrible with names. I'm terrible with, dates. It used to be great with me. Now I have to kind of go, what am I doing today? And look it up. So we all have trouble. So you can go online, but I think it's good to have it with someone who can then explain results. And there's a quick little 30 question test that a doctor can do, a primary can do in the office. So I think it's worth, if you're concerned, saying something to your physician just to say, and most times they're going to be saying you're fine, but just they could do it and then you'd at least have a baseline and know. So yeah.
I was just going to add one thing to that.
Mm-hmm.
Here at the Village of Schaumburg and the Village of Hoffman Estates, they do memory assessments.
Oh yeah.
So even if you're not going to your doctor's office and you want to make an appointment, we'll do one with you.
Where is it here in Schaumburg that they'll do it?
It is on Schaumburg and Plum Grove Road,
Oh,
and it's
cool.
the nursing and senior division out
Oh, there you go.
And then if you live in Hoffman Estates, they do the same type of test.
Okay.
Not to butt in. We
Yeah.
had one question from home too. Ed had asked what types of dementia should we also be aware of?
So there's a lot of different forms of dementia. I think it's from into 70s into 100 different types of dementia. The most common, well, we would say that the most common is mixed, is multiple things occurring in the brain. But what we probably hear the most is that it's Alzheimer's, is the most common. Then the second most common is Lewy body disease, which I just saw that Ted Turner had Lewy body disease. Lewy body, also Robin Williams had Lewy body disease, and then he ended up committing suicide, which is terrible. Lewy body is, it kind of presents like a mix of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's, but it's its own thing. And so people are having memory problems and mobility problems right from the get-go. They have them together. It's important, and then they have classic symptoms of Lewy body is great fluctuation in ability. So some days they can remember totally fine, some days really rough. And then also nightmarish hallucinations. So they're having these vivid hallucinations that that are difficult for sure for the person. And we see it as the like second or third most common form of dementia. Then vascular is dementia from strokes. Or sometimes you can notice that a stroke is occurring, sometimes you don't. And those are called TIAs, where the person and people around them might not even notice that something happened. But we can see it in the brain then when we're doing an autopsy later on. We can see evidence of strokes. And so that's why working on your vascular health is really important, because it seems to be very linked. And then another common one is frontotemporal dementia, or FTD. That tends to be, and who has that? Bruce Willis right now. There's different forms of FTD. There can be one where it impacts behaviors quite a bit. There can be one that impacts language quite a bit, depending on where it happens in the brain. So FTD tends to be with younger-ish people. Parkinson's can, for some people, they can have memory issues as the disease progresses. But for some, they can, like Michael J. Fox has lived for decades now with Parkinson's and does not appear to be having dementia at all. So a lot of people can have Parkinson's and not have it. Those are probably the most common forms of dementia. Then there's a lot more, but those are probably the ones you hear about the most and run across the most. Any other questions?
That Premola.
Prevagen? I didn't suggest it.
That's something that I've not bought it, but I think to myself, should I?
We would probably say no, because it hasn't been clinically tested. And they must have just gobs of money for marketing, because it's on TV all the time. There's always, so I've worked at the RADC now 29 years. There's always something that is like the rage thing to try. And for a while it was ginkgo. Many decades ago, it was ginkgo. Everybody tried ginkgo, even though ginkgo's not regulated. So the ginkgo you bought at one store wouldn't be the same as ginkgo from another store. Then for a while it became coconut oil. And everybody was trying coconut oil. And I ran a support group along with other people for people with young onset Alzheimer's disease. And I was in the room with people who had Alzheimer's. And they all would talk about, oh, my family member makes me take coconut oil. And it caused a lot of stomach upset. And now you don't hear about, and then coconut oil got a bad rap for being not good for your heart. So, it fluctuated. Now the thing I get asked about is Prevagen. People seem to, they see it on TV, they wonder about it. I don't want to say don't try it, but we don't see, because some people will be like, oh, it works great. But I don't know, I think you can also end up spending a lot of money for something that might not have great benefit. And it hasn't really been researched. They're just saying that it's good. So it's hard to know. Yeah. And it's hard because I think they know we're all afraid of this, so they develop these products. For a little while, I haven't seen it in a long time, there was like a home test in Walgreens and like CVS that was take it home and you can diagnose yourself. And it was like, one of my coworkers brought it in, she goes, have you seen this? And that went away, but it was there for a while, which you can't do that. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Very good questions.